Hello and welcome. You're in the 7 Pace webinar on software capitalization, increasing the percentage of work that is capitalized and reporting tips. We are just waiting for a few more people to join, so if you can bear with us, we'll get started in just a moment. Okay, great. Looks like we got the thumbs up. So again, this is a 7 Pace webinar on software capitalization, increasing the percentage of work that is capitalized and reporting tips for agile teams. Before we get started, I just want to point out there's a chat window. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll collect them and have a little Q&A session at the end here. We love questions, so please keep them coming. And this webinar will probably be about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have the time for the Q&A at the end. So thank you for joining. I'm Dave Berg. I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at 7Pace. Before 7Pace, I was the Vice President of Channels at Tempo Software. And before then, I was the Global Lead of Product Management at ShopperTrack, which is a business unit inside of Johnson Controls. So Tempo Software is another time tracking application, but in the Atlassian space, as opposed to 7Pace, where we work in the Microsoft Azure DevOps space. So I have a unique perspective because I led a program to manage and increase software capitalization in my role at ShopperTrack, but then I've also been an executive at 2 different time tracking companies. So I've seen both sides of the fence. When I joined ShopperTrack, it was interesting. We had some poor person from finance interviewing development managers every quarter trying to figure this out, right? They tried to map the released features to a percentage of individual developers' effort, and you can imagine a large organization that was not easy. And so this was time consuming, inefficient, extremely error prone, and nobody wanted to do it, right? It wasn't fulfilling work. But it also limited the utility of the data to just the finance team. I mean, the data was so error prone and so convoluted, we really couldn't get a lot of good use out of it otherwise. So after a while, several months of doing part of our overall transformation program, I led the part for, one of the parts I led was for this, where we got developers logging their time to the features and an automated reporting system in place that was shared across the team. So the development managers use that for process improvement and just general, understanding what's going on with the team. The product management team that I led used that data for portfolio management, understanding, how our features are progressing, what the value they provide, and so on. The finance, obviously, for the capitalization, but a lot of other things that they were able to use the data for once they could get it and rely on it. And then as part of the executive team, we also used that data for strategy and prioritization. It was really helpful to understand where our time is being spent, what we're doing with it. And when we look at a specific feature, a specific group of features, was that worth it, right? Would we do it again? Did we spend too much money on it? Did we get the return on investment that we're expecting? Those questions are really hard to answer unless you've got data you can count on. So the many ways we realize value from the time tracking data and getting it accurate and near real time, the one we're going to focus on today is software capitalization for agile teams. So it's important to start with what are we not going to talk about, right? Because I don't want to, I want to set expectations correctly. I don't want to lead you the wrong path. So what we're not going to cover in this webinar is tips on taxes for your organization. This is not a topic that I'm, able to give good advice for, and I'm just not going to lead you down there. Related to that is, whether you should or should not capitalize your software. There's lots of great opinions out there with people that know more about that than I. So we're assuming that you have some kind of an internal policy on how you're approaching software capitalization, that you've chosen to do software capitalization. And then in this webinar, we're going to try to help you with that. We're also not going to go too deep into product functionality. So if you're not an engineer, if you're not a developer, don't sweat it. We're going to talk about concepts and give you some context around those. And then if you want to go in and actually step-by-step follow this, there'll be a how-to blog posted on the 7Pace blog site in the next few days, and you'll be able to get detailed instructions to create the reports that we talk about. There's also a case study in the works with one of our favorite customers who has gone through a digital transformation, which if you've ever done that, you know it involves a lot of things. And time tracking was one of the things they focused on. And one of the measured results they were looking to get out of it was increasing their software capitalization. So it was really applicable to what we're doing here. And they did a great job. And we were so grateful to be part of that process with them and support them, as well as many other teams in there. And so we're really excited that they're helping us share their story. And so stay tuned for that. It's going to hopefully be released here in a few weeks. So what we will cover are two main ways of tracking and reporting capitalization for software. We're going to bookend that with the benefits of using a specialized tool for developers to track their time, why that's important and why that's relevant. But then also getting into the reporting functionality. Now, just because we talk about the two main ways doesn't mean you can't mix them, right? We're just doing them separately in here so you can understand the concepts and then do with it as makes sense for your business. So why would you care about a specialized tool for developers to track their time, right? So there's a couple big camps here, right? One is you're not tracking your time today, or whatever you're doing, people aren't following it. And you might get some objections like time tracking is not agile. Now, I don't really want to get into a philosophical debate about that, but what I can say is as an agile practitioner, I've been practicing agile for a long time now, there's nothing inherent in agile against time tracking. The problem is it's usually used as a weapon or punishment, as opposed to a tool that when used to help inform the team, identify blockers, generally improve your processes, that's a very valuable part of your agile process. Now, if you already log your time in a different system, for example, some enterprise-wide system that everybody, regardless of what job function they are, is logging their time, when you say, well, we already have our time in there. I would, okay, then I would just ask you a few questions and say, well, how's that working for you? Are you getting all the data you need in one go? Do you have a lot of back and forth about getting more clarity? How accurate do you feel that data is? If you look at the quote here, time is money, I really love this quote and a lot of things they say in their publications, where it's really getting to how soon after the event happens are you logging your time, and the longer you wait, the less accurate it is, right? So if you're looking at the screenshot at the left, you can log your time where you work, right? You can just click a button, add time, or you can set up timers. There's a lot of features in there to help make it easier for the person doing the work to log their time. And because the system is integrated in where you're working, right, in your development environment, you don't need to replicate that data. You don't have to pull out what projects are they, what work items are they, and log their time into a separate system. You get it right there, and as the system changes, the tool just automatically adapts as it goes. So this greatly reduces your complexity, reduces your admin costs, your overhead, and increases the accuracy because you're able to log your time as you do it. So you're confident in how much time, but also where you're logging it. A great, example is, how much time did you spend eating lunch yesterday? Do you know? Well, if you logged it, you might. Take that back a little bit. How much time did you spend eating lunch Thursday, last week, or for the whole week, right? Are you rounding up? Are you rounding down? If you're going to use that data for taxation or billing, you might not want to round. You might want to be as accurate as you can be to be as fair as you can, to reduce your risk as you can, and to maximize your resources. Finally, there's another part that might not be so obvious. Now, we have built in where you can further categorize your work by activity type. So if you have a work item, in this case, a bug, there's different things you do within the bug, right? You're going to do some development, you're going to do some designing, you might do some testing and different things like that. So activity types is a nice feature that is, I wouldn't say it's totally unique, but it's relatively unique within 7pace, where you can go in and as you're logging your time, you can say what you're doing. And so this gives you a lot more visibility, a lot more granularity in the data. So ultimately, I hope it's more valuable for the team. We'll get into some examples in a little bit of where that applies. So I'd be remiss as a a product manager and a growth leader now if I didn't point out that a tool isn't going to solve all your problems, right? It takes people, it takes process, it takes everything working together to put it together. But if you can understand the tool and understand your process and understand the people you're working with, maybe you can adjust one, two, or all three of those to get them to work better together. And so what we often find is when you're going in through change, you're going to have to make concessions. You're going to have to review things. Just thinking you can plug something in and it's going to work probably isn't going to be the best strategy for you. But so, like I mentioned, the case study, they had to understand the tool. They had to configure it a little bit differently than they thought they originally would. They had to change some processes. They wanted to change some processes to get better value out of the tool. And of course, they had to train the team. But training the team to use something that's just turned on in their development environment wasn't really a big ask. So just wanted to put that out there, give you a little bit of context that it takes a village, right? So getting to the meat and potatoes here, 2 approaches to tracking and reporting in agile organizations. Now, the first one is milestones. This is pretty straightforward. You start the timer when you kick off the project and you start capitalization. And then when you release that product, whether it's pushing it to production, shipping it, whatever your product is, that's when you stop. And the Agile Alliance put together a pretty nice document a couple of years ago, actually, accounting for a capitalization of agile labor costs. And it goes in, it's a quick read, but it goes into good detail. And I think it's just as applicable today as it was the day it was written to this type of reporting and realization of your capitalization. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. We'll get into that in a little bit more. Phase reporting is a little more nuanced. Now, if you think back to waterfall, you had requirements, you had design, you had implementation, so on and so forth, and you did one after the other. You did it in serial. Well, Agile mixes all that up. You're probably doing a little bit of that at every moment, right? Depending on how big your team is. So it's hard to say, I'm going to start with this phase and stop with this phase. I'm doing it all at once. So there may be some parts of that, some phases, or in 7 paces terms, activity types that you may want to capitalize, like implementation, development, and some that you may not want to capitalize, like requirements or design. Not giving you advice, just giving you an example. And so being able to see that data at that level of granularity is really, really important. And then of course, some orgs want to mix it all together. And actually, that's probably the most common use case. But like I mentioned before, we're going to keep these 2 separate just so we can explain them in clarity. And then you can mix and match as you see fit. So getting into milestone reporting, the best way that we find to do that in 7 pace is through budgets. Budgets are great. You can have an unlimited number of budgets in your organization. They can be assigned. It's really flexible. You can put it to a release. You can put it to iterations. You put it to specific work items, whatever you're going to use to define your milestones in here. Yeah, in this example, you can see we're just going to report on a single release. It's sprint number 3 for a car sharing app, and there you go. Planned hours is something that you can change later if you have an idea for it. It's really nice to see how am I doing against plan, especially if you're billing that out or however you're trying to manage that release. Now, once you create your budget, it's completely configurable. That's pretty easy. It is really important to understand, though, that a work item, so that's your epic or your feature or your task, can only exist in at most 1 budget. So you can't have your work item in a capitalization budget and also in some other, like a customer specific release or a theme release, some other budget can't hold it. So you got to be careful when you plan your budgets. Budgets are role-based controlled, so you got to have permissions to get in there because obviously, especially if you're dealing with capitalization, you don't want everybody in there accidentally making a mistake in there. And what's great is once you assign your iteration, you assign your work items within a budget, the time just gets logged in and it rolls up. So if you have an epic and that goes down to a feature and it goes down to a task and you've got that epic in the story, you log time to the task, it all rolls up. And it's as simple as that. Getting the data out. Now we have some really nice in-app reporting that I'm not going to show you. right? We've got widgets, they're configurable, we got default ones. It's really quite nice. All those are exportable to Excel, it's great. But if we're talking for the context of this discussion about sharing with another department, in my experience, the finance team either wants a spreadsheet or an API. So right here is how you can get that spreadsheet exported in the export time report. You set your date range. You can list your project and it'll include all the budgets for that project, and it's easy to filter on which one it is. It's important to point out the billable hours feature in here. So that's really nice because you can configure it to default on, default off, whatever you want. But if you've got a release and then you're also doing some billing inside of that release, which happens, right? Maybe you're billing to a different department or you're billing to a specific customer, it's a NRE or something like that. You may not want to capitalize that. That may go into a different taxable bucket. So that'll be a nice way to include that in the report for the finance team to evaluate and figure out what they want to do with it. Now, taking a look at budgets from a different angle, many customers use this speaking of billing with their outsourced billing. So instead of waiting for contractors to bill them for the hours they worked on a project, many of our customers got smart and they use this report to automatically generate invoices for their contractors based on the work that they've logged. And by doing that, they skip a lot of process steps, which are a lot of redundant approvals and things like that. And they just say, this time tracking system is a system of record. You either did it or you didn't. And it's a great way to encourage compliance with your contractors, right? Because if they don't log time, they don't get paid. So just wanted to throw that in as a little extra. With phase reporting, activity type, I've talked about a few times and you can tell I kind of like it, is the functionality that makes this possible. It's really helpful with, figuring out where you're spending your time. As somebody who loves data, I can flip this around in so many different ways and analyze it and figure out ways to improve or ways to assess. For example, if I'm doing a lot of time in discovery, maybe I didn't do a good job in the requirements gathering in the first place, or maybe that's just one example, right? So activity type, you can see on the left how you configure it. You can put in whatever activity types you want. I recommend you really sit down and think about this, right? Talk with the finance team, talk with the Scrum coaches, talk with the developers and figure out what activities you need. Get as many as you need, but never too many, right? You don't want to make this too long. You can always add more later, but taking things away gets messy, right? Because then you got to figure out how to recategorize stuff. And you don't want this big long list of things to go through. And really think about things like your Scrum ceremonies, like is retrospective an activity type? Is a daily stand-up its own activity type, or is that part of just meetings, right? That's entirely for you to decide. You put it in here. You can set the system default. Activities are set at the org level, so they're not by a team, they're by that whole organization, and you can set the default. Individuals can go in and set their favorites. So if you're a tester, you might want to set testing to be your favorite. So that'll be an easy thing to just make it that much faster for you to log your time. And then what's great is this screenshot you've seen before. If you look at this individual work item, you can see the breakdown of that time. So for this bug, 2 hours are spent in design, 3 hours are spent in development. As the work items roll up, so if it's an epic, you'll actually see the list of work items and how much time was spent. So it's really nice in the app. As you're going, you can see how these things are going and how they're distributed and who's contributing to them. Now getting into reporting, right? How do you get that data out? It's great that it's so easy to get data into the system, but you want to actually use it. So either, again, our beautiful in-app reporting with our widgets, but also how do I get it out and how to do things with that. So as I mentioned before, the in tool is exportable Excel. We have a specific reporting API endpoint that you can take this data out with. And what's nice here is if you look at the activity types, this is an example for Sprint 47. It's a 2-week sprint, 5 people, and you can see what your activities are. Now the export will go down to the individual person. So by activity. So if you have the previous example, there's a bug with 2 different activities, development and design. Those will be 2 different rows in the spreadsheet for you. So you can get great granularity, but this is, as a process improvement, I want to see the not set as close to 0 as possible, right? I want to know what's going on. And if I've got a not set, that's a flag to me that I need to pay attention. but also seeing the balance between them, how much testing versus development is appropriate for your organization at your stage in your life cycle. If you're early versus late, do you have a more mature system, or you got to do a lot more testing on, so on and so forth. Now, the big thing is you can mix these together, right? So like we talked about before, you can mix the milestone to phase reporting and do more involved analysis, either through an Excel spreadsheet or in our reporting part of our product, but also if you want to take this and export it out to your BI solution. A lot of companies really enjoy doing that because then they can mix the data sources, right? They can take the time tracking, cross-reference it with their Active Directory, their staff directories, and then other data to get their bespoke reports that they, to really automate their business processes. A growing number of our customers are actually using this data to feed into their workforce management systems. So where they have people across the enterprise entering their time, they're using the 7Pace time tracking data just for their developers, or the developers in the agile team combined. And what they find is that makes the developers happier because it's easier for them to enter their time. It makes the team happier because they're getting the more accurate data. And the API setup to get that through is very simple. So to justify the extra cost of a separate system, they just look at the time spent to log the time and the value of the data coming out, and the ROI is almost always a really fun exercise for them to do, right? So to sum it up, software capitalization, really the two main methods that people use are either the milestones or the phases, or actually a combination of the two. Now, doing the time tracking where your work is done is so important, right? It reduces your overhead, gives you better accuracy, and gives you better data. So it's a win-win-win. And then, it really comes down to that accuracy, right? Your time is not a renewable resource. Every minute is so important. So you need to get it right the first time. And when you're capitalizing or building your time, you need to be particularly confident in your data. We think we can help with that. We're the only app that's deeply integrated to Azure DevOps for productivity. By deeply integrated, we focus on accuracy. We focus on reducing your cost of ownership and making it almost automatic for developers to record their time while they're working. We have a nice saying around here: developers love us and enterprises trust us. So I hope you got what you were looking for out of this. And I hope there's a bunch of questions in the chat for us to go on to our next phase of Q&A. So thank you again for sticking with us for this webinar on software capitalization for agile teams. And we're going to take a few moments now internally here, review those questions, and we're going to start the next phase of this adventure. Thank you so much. All right. Can I get a thumbs up that the audio transferred properly? All right, good. So we got some questions. Thank you. I love questions. The first one we got in was, can the spent hours for each task be synced with Microsoft Timesheet? We don't have that integration today, but this is a tool built for developers, so integrating in with your spending timesheet is pretty straightforward. So if you'd like to work with us on that, we'd be happy to help you. We've got a pretty nice set of endpoints for automation, and so we can evaluate what data you want to flow and how you want it done, and it shouldn't be too hard to wire up. So cool. So please reach out, Dave@7pace.com and or support@7pace.com, and we'll help you out and get you going with that. Another one. Cool. And then we had another question. if we don't use budgets, or I'm assuming maybe somebody else is in control of the budgets, is there another way to report on costs and capitalization by feature? Yes, yeah, there's a lot of ways to do this. Budgets is just our favorite and pretty easy to do. First thing, obviously, you need to find what a feature is. Is that feature a couple random stories? Is that feature a set of epics that everything rolls up to? You got to define that. I hope that's pretty clear. And then once you have that, you can either, if you want to get really elegant with it, you can go into the widgets and customize those, or we're really happy to help our customers with those and customize that for your need. And you can either just view it there, schedule a report, export it, to Excel, or if you want to go the API route, we have a reporting API that can just pull all that data and either directly integrate into your BI solution, whatever you got, or dump it into a raw format like a Excel or something like that. So depending on, now if you want to figure out the costing for it, there's really three big categories for that. One is if you just want to do this many hours spent on that feature, that's pretty straightforward. If you want to apply that to a blended rate, so if you take, oftentimes you ask your finance team for what's the blended rate for this team, because they can see what every individual costs, they can do that for you and give that factor, and then you can apply that so you can get some connection with how much money was spent. Or you can get right down to it. What the finance team typically does is gets to the individual. This person costs the company, so many dollars per hour, and then their work costs that. And so it's different per individual usually. So there's a few different ways to view that data. I use all of them depending on what my audience is and what my goal is for communicating. Sometimes you just want to know volume, because regardless of how much people cost, you only have so many people on your team, right? And so you wanted to understand how much time is going where. And then if you want to segment it further by, a senior person's probably going to have a higher pace, we call it, so velocity times what they get done, than maybe a junior person. So you can slice and dice it a few different ways. All right, cool. So we got a lot of questions here. I like this. Thank you, everybody. The question is, how does Azure DevOps integration work at a practical level from a developer's perspective? Starting and stopping timers, is it tied to a work item status? Not necessarily the status, but it's tied to the work item. So there's a variety of things you can do. You can start a timer either native client. You can start a timer in Azure DevOps as you're working on it and stop it. You can go in after the fact and just say, hey, I worked on this work item for 2 hours and I was doing development. So if you have activity types, which I highly recommend use activity type feature, you can segment each work item by those activity types. And that really helps get visibility into where are you spending your time. That you just spent 8 hours on this one thing doesn't always tell the whole story. So I hope that answered your question. If I didn't fully get it to you, please put another one in or follow up with me directly. I'd be happy to go into more detail about that. What we really put a lot of focus on is user experience with Timetracker. So really trying to make it as easy as possible. The philosophy is, well, not only that great, it's easy to do my job, but it encourages people to track their time as they're going, which, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, is directly correlated with accuracy. And it's also nice to not have to have this thing looming over your head at the end of the week, at the end of the month, whenever you log your time, to try and kind of figure that out. If you can do it as you go, then it's done and everybody's happy. Cool. Please keep them coming in. We got a couple more queued up here. I think we got time for maybe, all right, I think we have time for one more. So how long does it take to get a program like this up and running? This kind of gets into, I think, I'll extend off the last one, is it really depends on the people and process. Remember the Venn diagram from earlier, it's people, process, and tools, right? They all have to work together. So the great thing about the way we're integrated with Azure DevOps, the way Microsoft set it up, is the installation is trivial. You just click it and it's in there, right? So that takes seconds or a minute to turn that on. And then training, again, like I mentioned, we spent a lot of time on the user experience. So once you're in there, it just appears. And it's funny, our support team often gets stuff sent over from Microsoft because people just assume we're part of Azure DevOps. They don't realize it's actually a separate app that's been installed. We've done that much work to make it fully integrated, which means if you know your way around Azure DevOps, adopting 7-Pace Timetracker is really, really simple. And the onboarding is generally minutes, right? You got to go through your configuration and set up the tool. Like I mentioned, activity types, you might want to customize, turn things off, set user roles and so on. So that's the admin side. But actually for the person in the trenches doing the work, the onboarding is really simple. So what it comes down to is how to make it a habit. Right? Even though it's easy doesn't mean you're going to do it. Picking up your laundry is easy, but not everybody does it. So getting it into a habit, training people, coaching people. And then the biggest thing is usually just agreeing to what data you want out of it, right? How do you want that formatted? Who's going to consume it? How are they going to get it? So getting it in, getting it turned on, a little bit of time to configure it, the rest of the time to use it, that's easy. That's minutes, hours, not a big deal. Getting the process and the people to connect with the tool, that usually takes 3 to 5 months, to be honest with you. When we're dealing with an organization that cares this much, it's usually fairly large, and the rate of change is limited. So 3 to 5 months is usually good to get a full program up running from zero to fully automated, great reports, things are flowing through. Cool. Do we have any more questions? I'm looking. Betsy, do you see anything else come through? If not, I would say thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate everybody that participated, all the questions that came in. If you think of something later, like I mentioned, dave@7pace.com or support@7pace.com, it'll get to me either way. And we'd be happy to answer your questions, help you out if you want to actually try to do some of this stuff. And also keep your eyes peeled. We'll have some more blogs posted on the 7Pace blog site that give you some more detailed instructions on this.